Deep in a vast wilderness area of far eastern North Carolina known as the Great Dismal Swamp, our adventurer Mike had taken shelter under a tarp during a rainstorm, where we left off in part 2 of episode 3. And he intended just to catnap, just to wait out the rain, but he fell into a deep sleep. And when he woke and sat up, he spotted with his peripheral vision movement, and he looked in that direction. And there, in the distance, for just a brief second, he saw a shadowy silhouette darting. And he instinctively felt that whoever this was, or whatever this was being evasive on purpose, not wanting to be spotted. And it was at this point in Mike's trip that he began to think that maybe he should turn back and end his trip prematurely. It might question in his mind who would be out there in this deep wilderness area shadowing him. He felt stalked, and he kept this absolute feeling of unease and of dread and of being watched at all times. But Mike decided to pack up and head out for his final waypoint of the day, which would be where he would camp. We talked at length about all of this, and Mike said that he had been in a number of situations in the military that was far more dangerous, but that he felt a desired level of adrenaline. That was what he wanted, some excitement, some adrenaline, but that this was different. Alone in this tough, rugged, unfamiliar, dark terrain with these eerie, creepy feelings that he just couldn't get rid of. It was a fact that someone or something was lurking in and around his camp, and that someone or something was shadowing him during the day as he journeyed. But his fortitude was not going to give in. Mike was determined to finish the trip, but the thought of turning back and just leaving was dancing in the back of his mind. Mike reached his final destination, his final waypoint for the evening. He had chosen higher ground for his camp that night for a very specific reason. He hoped that the soil on the slightly higher elevation would be less wet, less miry and murky. And as such, if he had visitors come around his camp again like he had the night before, that any prints left behind would be more identifiable, and perhaps he could figure out what he was dealing with, or who he was dealing with, how many, and that sort of thing. But he got his camp set up, and he ate a bite and sat drinking cold coffee in the dark, just listening, observing. The thought occurred to him that he had wanted a challenge, and he indeed felt challenged like he had not been challenged in a long, long time. But this challenge was different. He felt like he had nothing within his control, that at any time, once it got dark, that whoever or whatever could simply storm him out of the darkness and take him. And that thought would not leave his mind. But he heard nothing unusual as he finished his coffee, and he went into his tent for the night. Now, he had a plan, and here's what he planned. He planned to feign sleep, to pretend like he was asleep, turn off his light, and hopefully that would embolden whoever or whatever had visited him the night before. But nothing unusual. He heard no sounds. He heard nothing to indicate that anything was out of the ordinary. And finally, fatigue gave way, and he fell asleep. He woke up, however, early in the morning in a cold, cold sweat. He was having an intense nightmare. Now, it was not a nightmare, according to him, that had anything to do with his experiences with the horrors of war. This nightmare was custom made for the situation he was in. And in his nightmare, he saw figures coming out of the darkness from all directions, coming toward him. And then hearing the strange noises that he had heard that day, that previous night. And suddenly, he was grabbed and pulled off into the darkness. And as he lay there calming down and unscrambling this nightmare, and he completely, just for a few seconds, forgot about his outside area and was focusing on this odd, weird nightmare, which was basically a mirror of what he had feared during the day. But then suddenly he was pulled out of his thoughts. And he said it was by a sound that chilled him to his bones. He said his best description of it was a wail and a howl mixed together. It was somewhat deep and would rise and then fall and then rise and then fall. And he didn't feel like at all that it was any type of a known animal. And it was just plain creepy. And that feeling of dread, of weirdness, of eeriness, and of being watched was as strong as it had been thus far. Then he heard movement in one direction. Then he heard movement in a second direction, and then in a third. And these sounds of movement from all directions, he said they were not too close, yet they were too close for his comfort. He could hear them in the distance, and he listened intently. And after listening to the movement for a few minutes, very slow, purposeful, methodic movement, he quietly unzipped his tent. And his plan was to listen and determine what direction the movement sounded the closest. And he did so. He pointed his spotlight in that direction and suddenly switched it on. When he switched his light on, all movement stopped. He heard no movement. And he just shined his light into the darkness, keeping it in the same spot. And as he did so, a new sound, a sound that beat everything else. And he said, his words, that it scared him out of his mind and made him feel like just getting up and running in a panic, which was not in his character, but that's what he felt like doing. It was a series of shrieks, which was the word that he used in his description. And again, he felt like that may not be fully adequate, but they were shrieks, and it sounded like deep laughter following each time that he would hear the shrieks. And that went through a couple of cycles, hearing these odd shrieks, followed by something that sounded like his words, belly laughing, very deep sounding laughter. And he just sat frozen, shining his spotlight into the darkness, listening to these odd noises, trying to process what was going on. And Mike said at that point, he completely felt like prey that was being toyed with by a predator. And then everything went quiet, completely quiet. No sounds of movement, no sounds of noises, of anything. But he simply stayed on high alert, waiting on that sun to come up. And Mike said it felt like an eternity. But finally, the sun did come up. Daylight pierced the foliage. And he got up cautiously, looked around, and then went out and began moving around his camp in circles, in concentric circles. He would complete a circle and then move out just a short distance. And he was searching for signs. He was searching for prints, broken branches, any debris left behind. But he found absolutely nothing. And that feeling of being watched, it was still there. It was daylight, yet in the distance, Mike knew inside of his heart that he was still being watched. And it had just reached a level that he was completely through with this situation. How could he be stalked or something, some things or some people be lurking off in the darkness and not leave any sign whatsoever? So Mike made the decision that he would pack up and leave. He intended to double or triple his pace to get back to his truck that day. He said that he wasn't being a coward, but that the unknown was chasing him out of that swamp.